Top of the day to everybody. I hope that your week has been well, that you're feeling well, rested, and that things are going in a direction that you find pleasing. This is the Desert Viking, and today I come to you during week 27 of my journey. Today we are going to be reviewing a book. As I've been reading, I read a lot anyway, but during this journey especially I've been reading. But today we're going to be covering this book right here. It's called Born in Blood. Now, Born in Blood was on not a required, but recommended reading list in terms of Freemasonry reading. And Born in Blood discusses the history of the order and potential ties it may have to the Templars. Now, the book itself is split into two parts. So this is part one. I'm going to discuss the Knights Templar origins and history, and then in the next series, I will discuss the Freemasonry ties into that. So that's kind of what I have on tap for today. So going over where I am at. So for those of you who might be new here, this was a video documentary going over my journey from, betrayal, extreme betrayal, through the course of healing and rediscovery and rebirth. So I'm 27 weeks through all that. And in the mind, body, spirit realm, the body is on its third fitness program. I am adamantly working out to master my physical body. Essentially, I'm not going to allow my physical body to be an excuse anymore for someone to claim there's a deficiency with me. So I hired a personal trainer, and I'm on my third program now since this all started. This is a strength program, which means I don't lift as many reps, but I'm lifting heavier reps to try to get some more overall strength in, whereas the last two programs, 24 weeks, was me doing bodybuilding type exercises, which are a lot of reps at lower weights, but they build out your body more. So right now I'm focused more on functional strength for the next 12 weeks, and I'm on week 2 of that. Mentally, I enrolled in college. I'm finishing a couple degrees now. I'm adding another bachelor's degree, and this is in science of management, which I'll be graduating next fall, and then a master's degree in machine learning. I'm in the tech industry. I'm trying to stay on top of AI destroying all of our jobs. There won't be as many jobs in the future, but I don't think that they'll all be gone. But those jobs are going to go to people who have advanced degrees. There's no other way to put that. So I'm trying to stay ahead of that. And last, my spiritual awakening, as it were. I'm happy to say that my petition at my lodge will be read in a couple weeks. So hopefully that goes smoothly, and I am brought in, as a Freemason. That's my goal. That's what I've been putting a lot of energy into. Just because the petition's being read doesn't mean that I'll be brought in. The lodge has to vote, and if only one person decides they don't like the way I look, they can cast a black ball. Incidentally, that's where the term blackballing comes from. If you've ever heard of that, I've been blackballed. That comes from Freemasonry. And if just one person casts a black ball, you're done. You don't get admitted, and you basically have to start the process all over again somewhere else. Or you can stay at that lodge and continue and hope that the next time that person reconsiders. The problem is they don't have to say why they blackball you, and that can be difficult. It's not common, but it can happen, and I have to be prepared for that. So there we are. That's kind of been what's going on with me. I'm writing the 7 Gates of Rebirth, which I talked about in a previous video. And now we're going to discuss the Freemasonic roots, as it were. So I have to point out a few things. Maybe one important thing. From my studies and what I gather, People have been trying to tie Freemasonry into all kinds of things in human history, and none of them have succeeded. And why have none of them succeeded? Freemasonry was, in fact, an actual secret society up until 1717. And I'll discuss more of that in the next video. But in 1717, some lodges in London decided it was time to stop being secret. And so they went public. And this caused a shitstorm for its time. A lot of bad feelings, a lot of arguments, a lot of heated arguments, because it was seen as breaking their vows of secrecy. But anyhow, in 1717, the first official Grand Lodge of London was founded. And at that point, Freemasonry went from being a secret society to modern Freemasonry today, which is not really a secret society. Everyone knows about it. So they're doing a really bad job if it's supposed to be a secret society. We'll discuss all that in the other video. However, it is important to note that as a secret society, they didn't keep, that we can find, records detailing where they came from. In fact, with a lot of secret societies, things will be verbally passed down so as not to leave a permanent record that can be found to reveal the secret. So, in my opinion, they will never find an actual tie to the Templars or anything else. You just won't find it, because if it was a secret society, they're probably not writing down records. And in 1723-ish, the lodge tried to get all of the other lodges in Europe, or actually it was just Britain, Scotland, Wales, etc. That was the birthplace, from what I'm reading, of what we know of as Freemasonry, to turn over any artifacts so they could log them and kind of form a central history. And a lot of those other lodges were like, nope, not going to do it. You're breaking your vows of secrecy. And they burned or destroyed a lot of things. So you're not going to find any actual history. So what people try to do is they go down this rabbit hole of, we're finding coincidences and we're trying to tie those together. So the thing to bear in mind is, you're not going to, in my opinion, ever find something that says this came from this. It's just not going to happen. It's a lot like religious text. I know that men, and when I say men, I just mean humans, like to be told exactly how something is. And if it's not exactly how something is, we don't like that. But a lot of spirituality is, read it with your eyes, but listen with your heart. And that's what you have to do here as well, I think. Anyhow, so we're going to talk about the Templars, all right, the Knights Templar, because there are ties to Freemasonry and the Knights Templar which exist, that people are trying to say that we come from that, and we may, and there's a lot of good arguments for that. You're not going to get solid evidence stating such, but it's fun to think about, really, and that's really what this is. It's fun to think about. So let's discuss the Knights Templar here. All right. The Knights Templar, their long name was the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. Now, the Temple of Solomon plays a key role in Freemasonry. It is the main allegory from which all of their rituals are built upon. It is the allegories upon which they build themselves up. Their moral code is all centered around the Temple of Solomon, which is a biblical structure that used to actually exist. The Temple of Solomon is today called the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It was originally built around the 10th century BC, or before the Common Era. And it was made of white marble and gold-covered edifices. It had 3 main rooms. It had the outer vestibule, the main chamber, and then an inner room called the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies was where the Ark of the Covenant was placed. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, if you've watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, you might have seen the Ark. Of course, it supposedly contains powers that melt people's faces, and we don't know if that's true, but it was said to contain the Ten Commandments that Moses had brought down. It was one of the most holiest of artifacts that has ever existed in Christendom, or in fact in the Abrahamic religions in general, which would be Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, which are based on the Abrahamic God. At the entrance to the Temple of Solomon stood two 27-foot tall brass pillars adorned with ornately decorated capitals. This is where I'm going to start butchering names, and I apologize, but these are in Hebrew, and I don't speak Hebrew. The pillars were known as Boaz and Jachin, and they stood either side of the door that led to the vestibule. These two words mean, in him is strength, and he will establish. And these two pillars are something you will find in Masonic lodges. The Temple of Solomon was destroyed in the year 587 BCE, when Jerusalem was seized by King Nebuchadnezzar and razed to the ground. It was at that point that the Ark of the Covenant was lost and has never been seen again, and no one knows where it went. Could it have been destroyed in the siege? Could it have been taken by the invading army? We don't know. It's lost. A second temple was built on those remains in 516 BCE by King Herod the Great. Herod's temple would then be destroyed by the Romans in 70 BCE in retaliation for the Jewish revolt that saw most of Jerusalem and the temple itself destroyed. So that's a little bit of history on the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount's important because this is where the Templars originate from. So legend has it, in the early 1100s-ish, some point in time there, during the Crusades, which was a series of wars fought in the Holy Lands between Christians and Muslims, that 9 French knights went to Jerusalem, and they made their way to the site of the Temple of Solomon. And at that time, it was nothing more than some stables, and I think that was all that was left, and there wasn't much. And being knights, they were nobility, so they had connections, which allowed them to dig on the site of the Temple of Solomon. Now, I'm going to move this little picture over here of our friend, the Templar Knight. Okay. Now, legend has it they found something at that site. We don't know what exactly that was, but whatever it was they found, they went to the Pope with it. And they said, hey, we've got this really awesome thing. Now, there are popular theories. Some people say it was the Holy Grail that they found. Some people say it was the Shroud of Turin. Some people said it was the head of St. John the Baptist. Some people say it was the spear that pierced Jesus Christ. Other people say it was the location of where the Ark is now, which is rumored to be located in current-day Ethiopia. Whatever it was awesome enough that the Pope granted them a charter. You are now a knighthood. And you answer to no one but God, the Pope, and God, because the Pope was God's voice on earth. So whatever it was that awesome. And at that point, the Templars their headquarters were at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and the order itself would last for about 2 centuries. The purpose of the Templars was to protect pilgrims making their way to Jerusalem, because this is a very dangerous time. Pilgrims are, they're trekking from Europe to the Middle East to Jerusalem, and they're being accosted by corsairs, they're being accosted by bandits, they're being accosted by enemy soldiers. So the Templars existed to protect those people, to fight on those people's behalf, to make sure that they could make their pilgrimage. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, I'm going to butcher a lot of these names, and again, I apologize. I also do not speak French. I can do a lot of things, but multilingual I am not. Saint Bernard pushed an endorsement to have the knights become an order of the church. At that point, they received money, land, business, and noble-born sons from families wanted to come fight in the Holy Land. In 1139, Pope Innocent II declared via the Omni Datum Optimum that the order was exempt from local laws. They were allowed to pass through all borders, not required to pay any taxes, and were exempt from all authority save for the Pope. The Templars in battle formed shock cavalry, heavy cavalry. And one of their most famous victories was in 1177 during the Battle of Montesgard, where 500 knights helped several thousand infantry defeat the great Saladin's army of 26,000 enemy soldiers. Now, what the Templars were most known for, however, was their banking system. It was dangerous for someone with a lot of money to have a lot of money. If I wanted to travel to the Holy Lands, if I took all that money with me, obviously I can be robbed. If I left money back home, well, then my wife or nefarious family members could end up robbing me. So what happened was that the Templars, they got into the money business, and they created some of the earliest forms of banking. They would create at their temples, at their strongholds throughout the way, you could deposit money there, and in return, they would write you basically a check. It says, this is how much money you have, and you can redeem this check. So you didn't have to carry all that money with you, and you could take that money, or excuse me, that check, to anywhere that a Templar fortress was and redeem that and get some of your money out. So that's what they're most known for. Now, at the height of their power, they obtained major strongholds in the kingdoms of Castile, Leon. They seized the Order of Mountjoy in the late 1100s, and the Templars became a vanguard force, meaning they were in the front of the fray while in Portugal, and they were charged with operating castles along the line. So the Christians, at the height of their power during the Crusades, occupied a large number of coastal ports and whatnot, and the Templars held those, or were one of the orders that held those. Now, operating over there, far away from Europe, was a drain on all of the kings and the church. It cost a lot of money to maintain this war. And so by the mid-1100s, the Crusades started to falter. And the Europeans, they saw, they had other things to worry about, like themselves. They were constantly at war with themselves. France was at war with England. England was at war with France and those annoying Scottish people up north that they wanted. If you've seen Braveheart, this is about that era. King Edward I, King Edward II, Robert the Bruce, William Wallace, all that stuff's going on right now. And the European monarchs were losing their enthusiasm to fight this war thousands of miles away, and didn't really profit them any longer. And the allure that if they fought, they would be, redeemed in heaven had lost its luster. Additionally, by the mid-1100s, the Islamic world became more unified under great leaders such as Saladin, as well as the reborn Sunni regime in Egypt. Additionally, there were three main knightly orders: the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights, and they were constantly bickering back and forth. And these feuds would weaken the knightly orders. Now, the Muslim forces recaptured Jerusalem in 1187 under Saladin at the Battle of Hattin. And at this point, things started going bad. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II reclaimed the city for Christians during the Sixth Crusade in 1229 without any Templar aid, but they only held it for about a decade. And at that point in 1244, Jerusalem would be recaptured, and the city would remain lost to the West until 1917 during World War I, when the British would capture it back from the Ottoman Empire. So things were starting to fall apart around them. The Templars were starting to lose steam. And in fact, the Templars knew their main reason for existing was to help pilgrims get to the Holy Land and protect them. That's why they existed. If you take that away from them, there's no reason that they should be there. So, knowing this, the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templar Order, begins constructing plans for a new offensive. And he begins leaning on the French King Philip and the Pope for support in this. Now, Jacques de Molay was the godfather of King Philip's son. They had a fairly, it seems like a close relationship if he was the godfather of the king's son, had no idea of the brutal, I don't have another word to put it, so I'm just going to use this word, the brutal fuckery that was about to happen to him and his order. There's some bad shit about to go down. In 1305, the Pope was Pope Clement V, and he wanted to merge the Hospitallers with the Templars. Now, both of those orders, I don't know if they hated each other. It's really hard to say. They didn't like each other very much. And both of them were like, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And that exasperated the Pope. The Pope was like, look, I'm the Pope. You got to do what I say. And these knightly orders were like, no, we're not doing that. And so the Pope keeps trying. So in 1306, he invites them to France to come parley, because at the time that Pope, he was in France. A lot of power in France at this time. So Jacques de Molay delays himself for a little bit. And he goes to France in 1307. He's invited to come, talk about this new plan. So, cool. He takes some of his closest officers, and off they go. The fleet of Templars sails to France, and they're going to have this discussion with the Pope. Okay, well, there's crap going on behind the scenes. You see, the king, King Philip IV, he owes the Templars a lot of money. A whole lot of money. And the Pope, the church, owes the Templars a whole lot of money because the Templars were in the money business and they were lending money. They didn't really like that. They didn't really want to pay all that money back. So, and I'm paraphrasing and summarizing here. You can't just renege on your debt. But what if we could dissolve the order? What if we could accuse them of horrific things? That sounds like a great idea. And that's exactly what happened. So, as Jacques de Molay and his officers come in, they think they're going to be talking about this new grand offensive in the Crusades. On Friday, October the 13th, this is where also Friday the 13th becomes known as being an unlucky day, Jacques de Molay and his order is arrested, and they are charged with serious crimes. They're charged with sodomy, homosexuality, hedonism, blasphemy, spitting on the cross, heresy of the highest order, worshiping Baphomet. You name it, they were accused of it. The church had a special wing. You might have heard of it. It's called the Inquisition. The Church of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who preaches mercy, his men, the men on earth that follow him, have a special little wing of the church called the Inquisition, who specializes in torture. And so they're ordered by the Pope, torture the living shit out of them until they confess their crimes, and then basically put them to death. So over the course of time, the Templars are subjected to some of the most ruthless torture you can think of. And it's one thing to hear the word torture, and if you've not been tortured, not really understand that and go, well, that sounds pretty bad. It's another thing to actually get into what actually happened to these men. Actual torture. And I'm not going to go into it. We don't need to. It's graphic. But let's just say it's some of the most evil shit that's ever happened. And this point right here is probably, in my opinion, one of the church's darkest times. They torture all of these men. And here's the thing. If you're tortured and you confess, like, so you're being tortured and you confess, yes, I did all these things, just please stop. You'd like to be put to death. If you recanted your confession once they stopped, you were burned at the stake as a relapsed heretic. That doesn't get... This is how things were done. This is how things were done. So there were many Templar knights burned at the stake. Now, this all happened in France. The Pope sends out an edict basically to all the other monarchs saying, hey, and this was called Pastoralis Praemunate. This was sent out November 22nd, 1307. It says, all Christian kings, monarchs, should arrest the Templars and do bad things to them. We need to torture them and do horrific things and make them confess and then take all their assets and money. Not a lot of the other kings wanted to do this. In fact, King Edward II was on the throne at this time. Now, King Edward II of England was one of England's most deplorable kings that ever sat the throne. His father, Edward I, was one of the strongest kings. Edward II was like the total opposite. Edward II had a penchant for not really caring about being the king and was more interested in his lovers and giving them a ton of power, which would piss all his nobles off. That's a whole different story. But Edward II, one of the good things he did was he had a fairly good relationship with the Templars, and he's like, I don't believe all this stuff that you're saying. And so it took a couple months before the English started to arrest the Templars. It gave them, the Templars, plenty of time to get out of Dodge. And that's what they did. So only a handful of Templars were ever arrested in England because most of them had vamoosed. They had gone. Off they go. Some of them went to Scotland, and the Scottish were only happy to have these warriors in their ranks because they needed men. But they dispersed everywhere. That Templar fleet disappeared. No one knows where they went. It is rumored that one of the things they did was take up piracy in the Mediterranean and other waters to support themselves, but a bunch of Templars just vanished, and they went underground. And they had to go underground to survive. So they were reliant on people to keep them alive, to keep their secrets. And at this point in time, the Templars, of course, you have to understand, these were men who were brought into a holy order. They took a vow of chastity, so they weren't allowed to have wives, and they weren't allowed to have sex. They gave up all of their earthly possessions, and they had to take vows to the church. And so they had to be very devout to the church. They grew their beards out, and they wore sheepskin underwear to protect that vow of chastity. I don't know how that works. Oh, and they also didn't bathe. They weren't allowed to take a bath. So these are stinky, stinky guys. But I want you to understand, why don't you put yourself into their mindset that, they love the church, they're fighting for the church, they're holy warriors for the church, and now they're being accused of all these things, tortured and burned at the stake. Understandably, now they hate the church. They hate the Pope, they hate the king. They've watched all these horrific things happen. And one of the tie-ins to Freemasonry is, meaning that the Templars would have supported, or that Freemasonry is rooted in Templars, is that the Freemasons accept all religions, and the Templars would have had to have accepted all religions, because if they're being protected by people, they could no longer care what religion those people were protecting them. And so the Freemasonry order is open to all religious beliefs. Now, that's a point of contention with the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church has issued statements of blasphemy and heresy against Freemasons since they went public in the 1700s. But one of their main gripes, and I was raised Catholic and was told this as well, so I've heard it from the source, their main point of contention, other than, of course, the alleged devil worship and all the other stuff that's outlandish and ridiculous, the main point of contention was that because Freemasons allow other religions into their order, that is blasphemy. That's the main blasphemy, because there's only one church and only one correct way to God, and that's through the church, through the Pope. And Freemasons spit on that by saying any religion can join. So then the Catholics created the Knights of Columbus, which is basically their version of Freemasonry. Oh, human beings never cease to amaze me. Anyhow, so that's the Templars. The Templars were driven underground. They had to rely on others to protect them. And essentially, their order was dissolved in, I believe it was 1322 ish, something like that. Now, we'll wrap this up. Jacques de Molay was their Grand Master, super betrayed. He ended up, as the story goes, he confessed to all these horrible crimes under threat of torture. He was an old man at this time. He was like in his 70s. And the Inquisition was very good at what they did. They were specialists in human pain. Jacques de Molay recanted his confession. He basically said he had to sit down and go, like, all my men, they're looking at me for leadership. I'm already an old man. I'm going to go out with dignity. So basically, he was marched up onto a podium in the middle of the city. I believe it might have been Paris. It could have been a different city. I don't remember. And he was supposed to confess to the public, yes, the Templars worship the devil, and they do all these things. They're sodomites and yada yada yada. He was going to go do that, and then he was going to be either imprisoned for the rest of his life or put to death fast. I don't remember. But he gets up on the stage and basically goes, "We didn't do anything at all. We didn't do anything. We're innocent of all these crimes." And he flips him the bird. So he's, of course, marched to that evening, the Pope, in rage, orders him to be put to death, burned at the stake. Now, when they burn you at the stake, if the executioner is feeling merciful, what they'll do is they'll add green wood so that it smokes and you'll die of smoke inhalation long before you burn to death. Or they'll slip you something you can drink to make it where you're basically unconscious. Oh no, he did not get it. Jacques de Molay did not get any of these things. They got seasoned old wood, and he was slow roasted over that fire. The agony that he would have endured is beyond most of us and our comprehension. But the final part of this awesome legend is that as the flames slowly were burning him and he was screaming in agony, he said his last words. And his last words said, and they were in French, but translated, "God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death." He laid a curse on the king and the Pope, who were both there. The Pope died a month later. King Philip died later that year in a hunting accident. So, that is the Templars. That is part one of Born in Blood. I did do a little bit more research on this as well, just to kind of fill in some gaps. But again, if you're interested in reading this story, this is Born in Blood by John Robinson, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry. That was part one. That's about halfway through the book. That's the Templar history. If you're interested, you can pick that up off of Amazon. My next piece on this will be the other half of the book, and we'll discuss what the book has to say on the tie-ins to Freemasonry and the Templars. I hope you found this informative, educational. Maybe now you know a little bit about an old knightly order. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I look forward to the next and last video series, which will be on the other part of this book. And I'm excited to go over it. Until then, everybody, thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future and doing future content. See ya.